Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to a review of the other Soviet Tier 7 heavy tank, the KV-3. I've already done the IS, so let's do its brother, the KV-3. As I've said in some other videos, usually I would give a kind of historical rundown of this thing, but because this tank never really entered any sort of production at all, there isn't really much to say about it, because it didn't do anything. And the idea was essentially to up armor, upgrade the KV-1 or KV tank that the Soviets were already using. And so they took the KV, they lengthened it, they gave it some more armor, they gave it a shiny new turret, and they put a bigger gun in the turret. That's the KV-3. Voila, end of. There wasn't really anything else to say about it, historically, really. This thing never entered production. In fact, I'm not even sure if any prototypes were made. I believe there were some suspension units or something knocked up, but basically this is not a complete work of fiction on Wargaming's part, but it didn't really exist, so there isn't really much to say about it historically. What do you get in game? Well, in terms of the tech tree, this sits on what is traditionally thought of as the slower, more ponderous, but more heavily armoured Soviet heavy tank line. So you have, if you quickly look at the tech tree, the Soviet heavy tank line splits at tier 6. Well, actually now it splits at tier 5, to be fair. You get to the KV-1 at tier 5, then you can sidestep to the KV-1S at tier 6, and then go KV-85, IS, IS-3, IS-8, IS-7. This is the more mobile line that generally sacrifices a bit of armour to get that mobility. And then you have the KV-1 going to the T-150, KV-3, KV-4, ST-1, and IS-4, which is generally considered the less mobile but more heavily armoured machine. And in the same way that the T-150, and I've got a review of that if you're interested, in the same way that that is really the spiritual successors to the KV-1 in a way that the KV-1S and the KV-85 are not, the KV-3 is the spiritual successor to the T-150. It's slow, it's ponderous, it's heavily armoured. You have 1400 hit points, which is among the better hit point pools for tier 7 heavy tanks. The best is the Tiger at 1500, then you have the Black Prince at 1450, and I think the Tiger P might have 1450 as well. Then the KV-3 at 1400, and then the rest are kind of down at 1200 and something, generally speaking. And this is not a light tank. I mean, it doesn't look light, it's heavily armoured, it was never going to be light. It's 68 tons of Soviet steel, with a 750 horsepower engine, which is okay. Top speed limit of 32 kilometers an hour, and in the right situation you can reach and possibly even slightly exceed that. So its speed in a straight line is alright. The main way in which you know this is slow and sluggish is that traverse speed. 18 degrees a second. Now, the actual traverse speed of a tank, and this is something that came up with all the discussion about the Berlin trio that recently came out of machines, especially the Cromwell. The actual traverse speed is a function of things like ground resistance, engine power, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But the listed traverse speed, which is a factor into the actual traverse speed, is 18 degrees a second, which is sluggish however you look at it. I will look at the armour in more detail later on. On paper, 90 on the rear, 90 on the sides, 120 on the front, and on the turret, 130 at the front and 115 side and rear. I will also talk about the gun in a bit more detail later. Turret traverse is also garbage to go with the hull traverse. 22 degrees on the turret, 18 on the hull. 340 meter signal range, which is, let's not put too fine a point on it, utter trash. And a 730 meter signal range, which is fine, but no one's going to get excited about it. So, let's talk about those guns. There's a whole host of different guns you can use on this thing. Some of them you won't need to bother with. If you have any common sense at all, you would have already unlocked the 107mm ZIS-6 gun on the T-150. It's the T-150's big gun. 300 alpha, 167 average penetration, meaning that you never ever have to use one of these 85mm guns. If you've got onto the KV-3 and you have not unlocked this 107mm ZIS-6, why not? It's the gun that makes the T-150. You can also use it on the KV-2 if you really want to. go back and unlock it on the T150 or drop 3 XP or something. You do not want to be playing this tank with one of the 120, with one of the 85mm guns. So, the 107mm then becomes your stock gun. Then you have a choice of different 122mm guns. There's also a 100mm gun thrown in there for good measure. If you've seen my IS review, you may not be surprised to learn that I have not played this tank with the 100mm gun, the D10T. I just could not be bothered. Having played the IS-2 in the Chinese line with that gun, with a very similar gun at least, I wasn't particularly impressed, so I didn't bother with it. Maybe you guys do want to bother with it, and if you've tried this tank with that gun, then please feel free to leave a comment and let me know what you think about it. But really the gun I'm going to be talking about is this, the 122mm D25T. This is your standard mid-tier Soviet heavy tank gun. 122mm of raw derpitude. It is not a weapon of finesse, it is a weapon of brutality. 122mm gun, 4.88 rounds per minute, which is not very good, but then do bear in mind these are very large caliber shells. 175 average penetration, kicks backside at tier 6, at tier 7. It's a little bit on the lackluster side, to be honest. The T29 has 198mm of penetration, over 200 for each of the Tiger tanks and for the AMX-M4. The Black Prince is generally considered to have terrible penetration. That has 171, so yeah, the penetration isn't fantastic. That penetration goes up to 217 if you're willing to fire APCR ammunition, which makes it a bit more respectable. It's not hyper penetration, but it might be useful from time to time. 61mm of penetration with HE, which is actually pretty good. And as this is a large caliber gun, actually it has very, very usable high explosive rounds. 390 alpha for both of the armor piercing type of shells, which is, well, it's good. It's good at tier 7, along with the IS and the IS-2, joint highest alpha damage at tier 7. Still. 0.46 dispersion at 100 meters, which is god-awful. 3.4 second aim time, which is god-awful. This gun does not aim quickly. It is not accurate when it is fully aimed, but because the KV-3 is a slower machine, it does actually aim faster than the IS, simply because you're not travelling so quickly. That's all. So the gun, you roll around a corner, you derp someone in the face, you roll back. It's not an elegant weapon, it's just a big old baseball bat that you bludgeon people to death with, basically. Or what about everything else on this tank? Well, let's just quickly talk about the grind, I guess. So, where are we? Looking at Soviet heavy tanks, in order to get to this line of Soviet heavy tanks, you have to go through here. MS1 at tier 1, who cares? You're not going to spend long there. It's actually not a bad machine for a tier 1, but it won't take you long to unlock everything from that. T26 at tier 2, which is a very nice machine. I might even have a game or two from it, maybe not, can't remember, on the channel. T46 I definitely have a game from on the channel. It was a long time ago though. Again, it's not a bad machine. I mean, these are not light tanks in the sense of scouting. These are just kind of generic combat tanks. It's just they're small because of the time when they were manufactured, so they're classified as light tanks. T28 at tier 4, medium tank. It's the size of New Zealand and is approximately armoured as well as a sheep. The gun is good, but it's such an awkward machine to use. I didn't like it. Some people do. I didn't. KV-1 at tier 5, perhaps one of the most influential machines in the game. It is one of the first tanks people encounter that has serious armour and has something approaching a heavy tank style gun. This thing can teach you to angle your armour, aim for weak spots, all that good stuff. It's also kind of symptomatic or representative of the rest of the line. Slow, heavily armoured, with an alright gun. It kicks backside when it's top tier, it struggles when it's bottom tier, and that's kind of in common with a lot of these tanks. T150, I have a full tank review of that on my channel, feel free to go and check it out. It is the spiritual successor to the KV-1, still got shed loads of armour. The gun is now a proper heavy tank gun with terrible aim time, not very good accuracy, it's a close range brawling machine. But the armour on this thing is certainly not bad. It does however set on fire quite a lot. And then you get to the KV-3, which is where we are. And as you get to the KV-3, what are you already going to have unlocked if you have any sense? Well, clearly the suspension and the turret will not be unlocked. You never have that unlocked unless you've dropped free XP on a particular machine. Frustratingly, the top engine is only used on this tank, so you're not going to have the top engine. If you've played some of the other Soviet tanks, the IS, SU-152, KV-85, ISU-152, KV-13, KV-1S, you might have this middle engine unlocked. If not, you're going to have to play it with the stock 600 horsepower engine, which is not great. In terms of radios, in case anybody cares, top radio is shared by a lot of mid to high tier Soviet machines. Next radio down is a similar affair, but this one is used on the T-150, so you will have the second, you will have the second radio unlocked. You'll have this 107mm gun, and you're going to use it because it's the best of the guns you have available. So your stock tank, if you haven't played any of the other Soviet lines, is going to be stock suspension, stock engine, this second radio, 107mm gun. What about upgrade path? Well, there's a variety of different ways you could go. Don't prioritise the radios, no one really cares. Stock suspension, you don't need it immediately, you can kind of put it off. The stock turret, the armour isn't fantastic. Sorry, that's the stock turret. The armour isn't fantastic, so it can be a bit frustrating, but you can still make it work. In my opinion, you probably want to prioritise the engines first. Then worry about the turret, then the guns. Again, if you've played any of the other Soviet tank lines, you might have some of these guns already unlocked. You might have the 100mm already unlocked, and you might have the first 122mm from the KV-85 or something. If not, you'll have to grind these out as well. This isn't the most painful grind in the world, but it's not the best grind either. It is very, very, very sluggish when it's stock. And bear in mind, my stock configuration had this middle engine instead, which is 600 horsepower, compared to your stock engine, which is also 600. What's the actual difference between them? Same weight, same engine power, same chance to set on fire. I assume the second engine has a few more hit points and so is less likely to get bust when it gets shot at. I assume. But they're very similar. Huh. Gosh. Oh, in which case it won't make that much difference in terms of horsepower anyway. This thing is sluggish as all hell when it's stock. So, that is the grind for you. What about everything else? Consumables, I've just got your standard 3 sets, 3 pieces of consumables here. I mean, small first aid kit, small repair kit, manual fire extinguisher. Might you want to take anything else? You might want to take an automatic fire extinguisher, because this thing sets on fire like you would not believe. If you've watched my T-150 review, you will be aware that I thought that was a tinderbox. Good God, this thing sets on fire if you so much as look at it. It's ridiculous. So maybe an automatic fire extinguisher. I don't think you can really afford to take extra combat rations on this tank or anything like that, like Lendy's oil. I really do think you need all the other things to put your crew back in, put the modules back in, and put the fires out. Ammunition loadout, I've got mostly AP. 5 HE rounds, you could choose a few more. The HE rounds on this tank, because it's a large caliber weapon, are very good and can be very useful for things like soft targets or derping T-29s in the turret, which never gets old. APCR, it has its uses. I think I fired about 1 round of it in all the time I was playing this tank, so I've got a few rounds of it, but it's not that important, I don't think. Equipment. Well, if you were going to keep this thing, or you want a set of equipment to take on it, I think you would have to say choice number 1 has to be a gun rammer, because god damn the reload time on this is long. So gun rammer, choice number 1. Choice number 2, I would probably go for improved vents. Choice number 3 is kind of down to you. You can make a case for a series of different equipment slots. A toolbox, boost your repair time. I'll get my words out in a second. Spall liner, because HE rounds and artillery. This is slow moving. Artillery loves shooting you. Fill fuel tanks with CO2 to try and reduce the amount you get set on fire, but I'm not convinced that's a fantastic idea. Enhanced gun laying drive if you really can't handle the long aim time, and it is a long aim time. Cyclone filter to increase your engine durability. Your engine does sometimes get knocked out, but I didn't think it was a massive problem, so I wouldn't bother with that. Coated optics, no, your view range sucks. Camo net, no, what's the point? Binos. It would turn your terrible view range into something vaguely approaching acceptable. So that is an option. So I'd say your third equipment slot wants to be your choice of binos, enhanced gun laying drive, spool liner, toolbox, or... yes, one of those. Sorry, I don't know why I was saying or. One of those. Crew skills, there's not going to be anything particularly surprising here. Sixth Sense on your commander, because Sixth Sense prods buttock. I would say preventative maintenance on your driver, because those fires really do get annoying. Possibly safe stowage on your loader, repairs on everyone else. Maybe not safe stowage, I haven't noticed any particular ammo rack problems, in which case, repairs on your loader. It's not an exciting crew skill setup, but it's reliable, it's solid, it gets the job done, and it's effective. One thing I would like to note, just before we go on, that this thing actually doesn't get completely terrible gun depression. Usually with Soviet tanks you're looking at 5 degrees, which can get rather frustrating. This one has 7, which is not fantastic, but it means that you can kind of go hull down in a few more positions and use your not terrible turret armor to your advantage. Okay, so this shows the various different module locations on the KV-3 and gives an inkling as to why it sets on fire quite so much. So, crew locations, there's nothing really surprising here. Your turret is full of loaders and gunners and whatnot. I mean, there's a driver here, there'll be a radio operator over here, it doesn't really matter too much. What about the other locations? Well, looking at it from the front, this purple box here is your ammo rack, but it's not actually mounted at the front. As you can see from this side shot, it's mounted kind of below the turret. And so that means it's actually quite difficult to hit that ammo rack from frontal shots. You can, however, hit it with side shots. As I say, I didn't have a massive problem with the ammo rack on this tank, so I don't think it's a particularly big deal. However, these blue strips on each side, fuel tanks. Look at the side profile. See that blue bit? Fuel tank. In fact, you can actually put a shot, you know, just below the turret, just above the hull of the tank, and you could damage the ammo rack and the fuel tank at once. And of course, at the rear here, this green section is engine. So from the front, you have these 2 strips that equate to fuel tanks. From the rear, you have this massive block that equates to engine. From the side, shoot this anywhere in the hull that's not the turret, and you will probably hit either the fuel tanks or the engine. And what do fuel tanks and engines do? They burn like it's going out of fashion. So yeah, this thing catches on fire if you so much as look at it, because it's just covered in engine and fuel tanks, which will burn, 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 which gets really rather annoying. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the armor profile on this apparently very heavily armored machine. There we go. Well, I mean, what is there to say? From the rear, frankly, who cares? I mean, 90 odd armor at the rear of the hull, 120 at the rear of the turret, it really doesn't make any difference. From the front, the tank, World of Tanks claims it's 120mm, and that's true on this panel. If you look at the lower plate, it's 100mm. This tiny little lip here is 120. This slope here is 80. There are some weaker points on the front of this stronger plate, though, to also bear in mind. Side armor is 90 as advertised. In fact, this armor scheme is pretty close to as advertised, to be fair. Of all the armor schemes that you can come across, this is not the most deceptive. So if you're trying to get the most out of this tank, if you kind of angle it something like this, you end up with something like 170 on the side, 150... take the angle a little bit more the other way, 160, 170. That's kind of your optimum sort of angle. It's close to 45 degrees actually. It's not too far off. And of course, if people put shots into your tracks, it's just going to get stupid armor values. So yeah, there's that. Try and angle something at that angle if you're just out in the open and you're trying to angle against your opponents. Obviously, if you're side scraping, well, I mean, just show them... whoops-a-daisy. Just show them... script. Just show them that kind of angle. You know, just giving them the angled side of your hull, and you should be able to poke your gun round at them, and you know, put a good angle on it, and you can get some fairly nice values along this side. Shots at the front of the turret are a bit of a lottery. I mean, there are some regions of this turret that are, I mean, on paper, this is 115 because it counts as side armor. This pit is 130, so that's the actual turret front from there to there. The rest counts as side armor. But if you're actually trying to shoot this darn thing from the front, that's 217 effective. This starts coming down to 172. The gun mantlet is very variable. You have regions that are, there's 477, that's 130, that's 509, 430, and I found an area earlier on that was over 800mm of effective armour. It's very RNG based. You could just go straight through, you could bounce on the gun mantlet itself. It's kind of a roll of a die. As for the weak spot up here, the commander's hatch, when I say weak spot, I mean it's still, what, 115mm thick? It's the same as the side armour of the turret. It's not that weak, especially when you consider the angling, and if your opponent's using their gun depression, it's actually going to be quite difficult to hit that because it's at the rear of the tank. The engine deck, as with most vehicles, is relatively hittable. You know, if you're artillery, go for it. If you're anyone else, go for it. It's not as weak as some tanks, but it's pretty weak at about 40mm thick. So that's kind of the armour of the KV-3. It's pretty uniform, and it's fairly close to what is advertised in the client. It's not that deceptive, which makes a nice change of pace. Alright, here's the first of the 2 bits of gameplay I have got for you. We are top tier as ever, which is really where the KV-3 likes to be. Now this is El Haluf. Couldn't remember the name of the map for a moment. I'm using some grinding equipment, nothing special, nothing to really get excited about, and this is an encounter game. Now if you're on El Haluf, there's a very good chance, and you're in a heavy tank, you're probably going to be making your way over toward this sort of A1, 2, 3 kind of region, that top left corner of the map. So, for some reason the Hummel asked me to follow him, but I'm not going to follow artillery, that would be dumb. So we're going to try and get ourselves into a close range fisty fight and see what happens. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit because the KV-3 is not exactly the fastest machine in the world. Feel free to play the Benny Hill theme in your heads as this is going on. Alright, so we've finally found the engagement. T-50, Jagdpanther have been spotted. Someone's already nailed that wee little chaffy. And it's me, a Comet, an M5 Stuart, a Panzer IV-H, and a Tiger. So, it's okay. I mean, we've got 3 top-tier tanks here, 2 of which are heavy tanks, but the Tiger isn't exactly renowned for its armour, let's be honest. And a pair of, well, there's 1 little light tank and a bottom-tier medium tank, no idea what he's doing there. I am not stopping for this because I want to get across this gap. I put a big meaty shot into the IS's face and he puts a shot into my tracks, which is amusing. And now, why is there a B1 in this game? Good God, that guy shouldn't even see tier 6 games, let alone tier 7. Oh well, he's there and I have a shot, so I put a shot into him, but in this sort of matchmaking, a B1 is really not a threat at all. BDR, however, can be a threat, although it looks like he's pretty close to stock, but I put a big fat shot into his turret anyway, and take off a huge sliver of his health. Neither of those guys are a match for me. But the Tiger has actually found some friends who are worthy of attention, so let's ignore those tiny little bottom tier French tanks. Who, are they platooned up? Yeah, they are, along with a Churchill. And see if we can put some pain on these bigger guys. Aim at the... Oh, I switched aim to the shoulder plate of the Tiger P. I'm not sure why. I had a fairly decent shot at his commander's hatch. And the shot ends up going wide and not hitting the mark. But I only lose my tracks for the privilege. This T-50 thinks he's being cheeky just by bobbing in and out. I mean, I'm unlikely to bother wasting a shot on him, to be honest, because there's a Tiger P that needs dealing with, and well, maybe I will waste a shot on him, who knows. No, just going to ignore him because who cares. And put a nice big shot into the commander's hatch of that Tiger P. I'm not going to waste a shot on that little T-150. Yeah, a kill is a kill, sure, take a gun out of the game, but he has a pathetic little gun. And he does actually manage to take my track out there. And putting a shot into him and wasting that reload time could potentially give me problems in the engagement with this Tiger P, so I don't really want to risk doing that. Tiger P puts a shot into me, I put a shot into him, but I hit a damn sight harder than he does. And he's just trading alpha damage with me here, which is a terrible idea from his perspective, but there we go. Tiger 1 from our team decides to push it, kills the BDR, actually, no, kills the Tiger P. Our Comet nails the BDR, and there's a Jagdpanther and a T-50 around this corner. Jagdpanther does damage and takes my track off. I'm just going to let my crew put the track back on. There's the T-50, now I'll kill him. Put a shot into his rear and finish him off. Side scrape out against this Jagdpanther, which is kind of what the KV-3 does. Does an awful lot of side scraping, so get used to it. And we actually ammo rack the guy to take him out. These are quite high caliber shells, so ammo racking people is a decided possibility. There's a KV-2 around here as well, so we'll get a shot on him if we can. He's got a good amount of health left. Oh, no, our artillery shuts him the hell down. That leaves an IS Tiger 1, GW Panther, and the Wolverine. And hopefully you can see what is the bread and butter of this tank. Side scrape around a corner, trade shots with someone, put in a bigger shot to them than they put into you, rinse and repeat. Take advantage of the fact that you probably, certainly if you're top tier, have better armour, more alpha damage, tracks that will soak shots, you know, and more health. If you're not top tier, that can be slightly more awkward, but we'll get onto that in a bit. In this situation, we are top tier. Now, I actually do take a shot there. I'm not sure if that went into my tracks or if I actually took HP damage from that Wolverine. I wouldn't be surprised if it just went into my tracks. Because the Wolverine's gun is quite small. That, however, was artillery, and I am crossing open ground here. Oh no, I did take damage. The Wolverine is using the 105mm howitzer. Alas, I did take a hit there from the enemy artillery. I'm out of position now. I'm in the open. And now you can see how vulnerable a KV-3 is when it is in the open, when you are not able to angle your armour effectively against your targets. And when there is artillery in play, that was a long-range shot. It was never really going to do a great deal of much. And that Wolverine is just firing HE at me, knocking out my fuel tanks, damaging modules, generally wrecking me, and then the GW Panther shuts me down. So, wanted to include this replay because you got to see both sides of it. You got to see how you can bully the hell out of your opponents when you're in a situation when you can use that armor, when you can use the big beefy gun. And when you can out-trade people with that alpha damage. And I also wanted to show you what happens when you go out into the open. You get shot by tank destroyers, and you get killed by artillery. Welcome to the world of playing heavy tanks in general, the KV-3 in particular. It's big, it's slow, it's lumbering, and it is a prime artillery target, I'm afraid. Come on, Panther, you can take out this IS. Good boy. Just the GW Panther to take out. Get some revenge for me. That GW Panther's racked up 3 kills. Well done to him. As far as I can work out, the GW Panther is one of the better, if not the best, tier 7 artillery piece. 2 more shots to put that guy out of his misery, or out of our misery, however you want to think about it. And he's dead. So there we go. Game number 1. Showing you the armor in action, the gun in action, and the lack of view range, lack of accuracy, and vulnerability to artillery in action. So despite how that game ended, i.e. we got nailed by artillery quite hard and picked apart by a low-tier tank destroyer who was using a derp gun, we still managed to pick up a fairly respectable result. Second class mastery, high caliber, 1003 base experience, 35,000 credits with a standard account. Just shy of 3,000 damage. We were at the top of the team fairly comfortably, picking up 2 kills and of course that high caliber medal. In terms of damage, we easily outstripped anyone else in the game without too much difficulty. 9 shots fired, 8 hits, 7 pens. For that, 2,908 damage. We received 14 hits, of which 8 penned, 6 didn't pen. Bear in mind that's going to be a little bit skewed by the fact that we had that Wolverine peppering us with high explosive, and hence our damage blocked by armor is relatively low at 645. And we also had the artillery, you know, taking a dump on us from a great height. 35,000 credits translated into 18,000 profit once you had taken away the repair costs and the ammunition costs, and the repair cost is about as bad as it's going to get because we died. So there we go. Not a bad game overall. It's a solid game. It was nothing spectacular. It just showed you some of the strengths and some of the vulnerabilities of this tank, even when it's top tier. Artillery is always a threat, always a threat for you in this machine. So is anybody loading HE really, or loading decent caliber HE? That KV-2 would have been a problem if he hadn't been shut down by our artillery. As it was, he didn't end up being a massive problem for us. He was already dead. But there we go. Them's the breaks. Alright, bottom tier game now as per usual. There are 3 tier 9s per side, so, you know, we're bottom tier, but it could be worse, it could be better. You know, you just deal with it. We're here on, is it Hidden Village? Not Hidden Village, Sacred Valley. Hidden Village is the Japanese map, I'm just being an idiot. There is only 1 artillery per side. Yay! But the artillery is tier 8. Boo. That GW Tiger P has a big gun. And we, you know, demonstrated in the last game just how well the KV-3 takes artillery. Exactly. So, this is a tier 9 game, but having a quick look at the tanks the enemy team has available, they're relatively soft. 2 IS-8s, tier 9 heavies, but still quite soft. WZ-111, soft lower plate. 110, arguably actually from the front the toughest tank they have on their team. 112, soft lower plate. AMX 5100, soft. T34-2, soft. Black Prince, not soft, but we can certainly hurt him with this gun. So actually, if we go and do the standard heavy tank brawling thing, with this particular setup, we can do okay. And that's just the thing with having a quick look at what tanks are available to both teams. You know, you can work out the fact that even though this is a KV-3, and it is outgunned by most things on the enemy team, it is still capable of laying down a good amount of hurt because most of the enemy tanks are relatively lacking in armour. 175 average penetration, it's okay for a tier 7 heavy tank. It's not fantastic, in fact really it's toward the bottom end of the scale for a tier 7 heavy, as I've already mentioned, especially when you combine the bad accuracy and aim time, but this gun is not for sniping. So if you can make the engagement close range, you really want to, and I'm going to try and flank those guys, but oh good lord, that's a tier 9 heavy tank, WZ-111 1-4. This is bad, but shot number 1 goes into his lower plate. There you can see how hard he hits. His average damage is 490 with that gun. It is ridiculous. And I'm thinking, oh Christ, I am so screwed. Unless this guy makes some serious mistake. He puts another shot into me, but manages to not penetrate me. I can only assume that's either my tracks or the gun mantlet doing its thing. And now I'm trying to draw this guy up toward me on the basis that hopefully I can bring this guy towards some friends, or at least as he's trying to move his way up this inclined area, he's going to struggle with his gun depression. Chinese tanks don't have great gun depression, and he's going to allow me to put more shots into his lower plate. Chinese WZ tanks have terrible lower plates. You've already seen 1 shot go in. See if we can put in any more. This guy's trying to side scrape out around the corner. Generally speaking, Chinese tanks, the side armour is okay but not great, and he was massively over-angling there, and that was a bounce. Now, off the top of my head, I don't actually know what the reload of the WZ is. On the one hand, he's got a bigger gun than me, so you might expect it to be more. On the other hand, he's 2 tiers higher. I do, however, now have a friend, this IS. WZ puts a shot into the IS, and I'm trying to take an opportunity to, while he's reloading, put a shot into him. I put one in and then try and back off. I'm trying not to take any damage further from this WZ. IS puts a shot in. Did he track the guy there? I can't think why else he'd just be sitting there. I bounce a shot and killed him. So I only actually took 1 damaging shot from that WZ. In fact, all the WZ managed to do for his life was put 1 shot into each of a pair of tier 7 heavy tanks. Not exactly the best trade in the world, let's be honest. And there you can see I bounced some shots even though I was facing a tier 9 heavy tank with something like 250mm of average penetration, something of that order. And even with my horrible little 175 average pen gun, I was able to hurt him. It's just a matter of knowing the tanks you are facing. Now, if that guy had been an E75, I would have been all kinds of screwed. Frankly. But it wasn't. And if they had had an E75 on the enemy team, I may not even have come to this area of the map. One of the reasons I came here was because, as I mentioned earlier, I looked at the team list and saw that most of their tanks were pretty soft and that I could hurt them. So, now I'm able to do what I was trying to do in the first place, flank around these guys and try and put some shots into them. And we are going to meet Well, judging by the minimap, probably a 112. Or something like that. There's the 110. IS-8. Can we come up behind these guys? And there's the 112. And shot into the rear. Yes, we'll take that. Thank you very much. Take the shot, back off, and then we're going to push around this corner, if memory serves. So, the enemy team has actually managed to defeat the tanks that they were facing right up in this corner, but look at the scoreline, it's 11-3. They're basically the only casualties our team has taken, this trio of heavy tanks. Conqueror, IS, and the T-150. Everyone else has gone. 112 here, he does not have the gun depression for this. I have better gun depression than him, he bounces on me, I penetrate him. And again, 112, very similar armor profile to the 111 before. He is now angling his plate upwards, meaning that I can penetrate it with 175mm of average penetration, and I do, and then I die. Die? But I had most of my health left. Remember that GW Tiger P? Yeah, the enemy tier 8 artillery nailed me, but in firing, he gave away his position, and our artillery got some revenge for me and killed him. So, there's only the two of them left, a 110 and a 112. I've put the 112 on, you know, not great health. He's now dead. There's just the 110 left. He's a variety of different kinds of screwed. Is that Tortoise going to pick up the kill? Oh, it was the Tiger who picked up the kill. There we go. So, what did we get there? We got that you want to pay attention to your team composition as you do in any tank. This is not specific to the KV-3. And inform where you go on the map accordingly. Like I said, if the enemy had had more heavily armoured tanks, there's no way I'd have been up there brawling around that area, because I can't take on an E-75 in a one-on-one engagement. But I can take on, if the situation's right, something like a WZ-111, just because the armour isn't as good, so that gives me a chance. Now, in a gazillion different other situations, that WZ, or with a gazillion different other drivers, however you want to think about it, that WZ would have killed me. It'd have killed me so hard. But we managed to, well, kind of outplay him, and force him to expose his weaknesses, and we managed to kill him for it. We only actually took 2 damaging shots all game. One was a 130mm shell from that WZ-111 1-4. And the other was that, I don't even know what caliber shell, from the GW Tiger P that killed us. Again, we were eventually taken down by artillery. This thing is very, because it's large and ponderous, it is incredibly vulnerable to artillery. And it's very difficult on most maps to be artillery safe. Realistically, if you're going to be artillery safe, most of the time, you're not going to be taking part in the game. So to a certain extent you have to kind of hope that you're going to be okay-ish. And as it turned out, we got a little bit unlucky with that GW Tiger P. I mean, the artillery isn't that accurate, but then again, he was relatively close if he was up in that B8, B9 corner. This is not a huge map. Them's the breaks. Regardless, despite the fact that we only actually damaged 2 tanks on the enemy team, that was still enough for first class mastery. We got 1053 base experience, which is very similar to our base experience score from the previous game. Bear in mind, the 2 tanks we damaged, the 112 and the WZ-111, in particular the 111, were both higher tier than us. The 112 is tier 8, the WZ is tier 9, of course. So that was 1053 base experience, 31,243 credits, and of course, first class mastery. And it was actually, despite what you may think, it wasn't that far off the damage count from the previous game. Previous game we did something like 2,900 damage, this was 2,500, but with much nastier matchmaking, so I was fairly pleased with that result. If you order people by the amount of damage done on both teams, then the Leopard prototype is first, followed by our M40, M43 artillery piece, then the IS-8 on the enemy team, then the Conqueror on our team, and then us. So we finished fairly high up on the damage table. Before anyone starts whinging about how overpowered artillery is, just to nip this in the bud, look at the artillery on the enemy team who actually killed me. He achieved 1,474 damage, most of which was from killing us. He basically achieved 2 damaging shots per game. He's got 2 kills. I did more damage than him, in a lower tier tank that's not artillery. You know, it's not overpowered in this case. He just got lucky with his shots. He targeted me. He killed a tier 7 heavy tank. Congratulations for him. But then I can't be too harsh on him because in that situation his team had just failed completely. We fired 7 shots. We hit 7. We penetrated 7. We didn't use any premium ammunition or any of that gumph. Took 7 hits, 3 penetrations, 4 non-pens. One of those penetrations was into our tracks. One of those penetrations was the WZ, which we felt, and one of those penetrations was the artillery wrecking our faces, or from behind. C'est la vie. We actually blocked more damage with our armor than we did in the previous game, despite the fact that this was a tier 9 game and previously we were in a tier 7 game. Spotted 2 enemy vehicles, damaged 2, destroyed 1, a negligible amount of assistance damage on an IS-8. We got completely killed once more. Resupply ammunition, not dissimilar, so we walk away with about 16,000 credit profit, which is not too shabby. So hopefully those 2 games have given you a bit of a flavour for what it's like to play the KV-3, both when you are top of the feeding pool and at the bottom. So, what are my thoughts on this overall? Well, it has its good points, good armour, reasonably good armour anyway. The fact that it's slower can be an advantage with the better gun aiming stats on the move and after you've finished moving and all that jazz. And I've had good results in this. I can't sit here and tell you that my results in this tank have been absolutely dreadful, because they haven't. I played 89 games in this, 67% win rate, easily got my ace tanker several times, 606 average XP per battle, which is with a regular account, it's not a premium account. Yeah, 1.24 damage ratio, 2.41 destruction ratio. I racked up a mark of excellence. A top gun, 4 high calibers, 5 steel walls. A Radley Walters, yeah, you'll see more of that later. So my stats in this are actually not too shabby, but I genuinely feel this machine is inferior to the IS. It's other Soviet tier 7 heavy tank brother. I just think the extra mobility of the IS makes it a much more flexible machine. That's my opinion. This tank might be viable if it didn't set on fire every time someone so much as looked at you. It's so frustrating, the amount of times you end up burning. Really, really annoying. And it means that this massive chunk of hit points, 1400, is actually not as good as it at first appears, because you lose a respectable amount of that when you set on fire, and my god, it's irritating. Anyway, c'est la vie. Also, of course, you've got this 122mm gun. I don't like the 122mm guns, but I do think it's the gun that works best on this tank of the ones I've tried. But I don't like it. Basically, I am not keeping this, not a chance in hell. It is, for my money, one of the worst tier 7 heavy tanks. It's down there at the bottom of the pile, probably with the Black Prince and the AMX M445. I don't think it's as bad as the AMX, and I think it's comparable to, just a little different from, the Black Prince. Neither of them are spectacular machines. Yeah, the IS-2 are both better. The Tigers are probably better. I mean, the T-29 massively outclasses it. So, yeah, it's not a painful tank to play, but I can't honestly recommend it to anyone, if I'm going to be honest. So, yeah, there's that. So I'm not keeping it. But it's not a completely awful machine, and that's about the best thing I'm going to say about it to round things off. So as you can see, I've already bought the KV-4, and my crew are already in that machine instead. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, maybe even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you very happy hunting on the battlefield. Ciao, ciao.